What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Find out every Monday at 8 on Notes from an Artist. Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. Every Monday at 8 on CygnusRadio.com. And check out previous episodes on our podcast. NotesFromAnArtist.buzzsprout.com.
Hi, this is David Gross, and along with my co-host Tom Semioli, I want to welcome you to another edition of Notes from an Artist. Tonight, we are really pleased to be with songwriter, bassist, and all-around creative guy Colin Moudling. Colin was a member of XTC and its side project, the Dukes of Stratosphere, and he has just released his first single, The Hardest Battle. We have an awful lot to talk about, so let's get started. Hi, Tom. Hi, Colin.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Colin.
Good morning.
So, 3 bass players walk into a Zoom chat. Complete the sentence.
There's no answer to that, I think.
There is no answer. That's the answer. There is. How you doing, Colin? How are things?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
We're grappling with a potential COVID lockdown again. I am in a place called New York City. David is in a place called Connecticut. You're in London, yes?
Yes, I've heard of those. Yes.
I'm in one of the colonies.
I'm in Swindon, actually. I'm in Swindon, my hometown.
Yes, okay. So things safe there? Things relatively sane, or you just...
Well, they're opening it all up. It's going okay, but one fears what might happen.
Yeah. You know, David and I are planning on doing our radio show live, and we just hope we have an audience that'll be able to come and see it.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And hopefully I won't wear a mask, so they'll be actually able to hear what I have to say.
Well, these are uncertain times, gentlemen, so we have to make the most of it. Yeah.
That's right. Who would have thought to do Zoom interviews a year and a half ago, right? They've become ubiquitous. And I see, Colin, you've done a couple of Zoom.
Yes. They've become the norm, really. And why not? So, yeah, if it's available to see each other as well, then why not?
This is a lot more convenient than doing a press jump.
Oh, yes. It's conversational, isn't it? So that's all good.
Let's start. Let's go backwards, David. Let's start with Colin's new single, The Hardest Battle. It's a video and a single, of course. And I think it's really a song of the time. It's very pertinent for what we're going through.
Well, it was obviously recorded during the lockdown, the first lockdown, which happened last year, the early part of last year. It's not specifically about COVID or anything. It's about being oneself, really. I was looking through a book one day, book of pocket positives, if you want to look that one up. And it's just basically sayings and phrases from famous people down the years, you know, Churchill and Roosevelt's in there and all those sort of people. And there was one by an American poet called E.E. Cummings.
From Massachusetts.
Yes, I think he was. And there was a phrase in there which he'd coined about in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you look like everybody else means to fight the hardest battle, you know, to be oneself. And I thought, well, there's a title there. At least I can work from that. So, yes, I had some chords and they seemed to be a marriage and off you go. So the spark was there and then. But that's where it sprung from.
It's interesting you mentioned, you know, in New York City, we have a place called Times Square. And I travel to London quite a bit, and I go to Piccadilly and Soho, and you're surrounded by ads, and they all the ads seem to say you need to be yourself, buy our product, just like everyone else. So that's why the song sounds so pertinent to me, because we're encouraged in advertising to be individuals, but we all have to buy the same products for some reason.
I think it strikes me that most people really aren't themselves, you know. Mm-hmm. They really analyzed it. And I think you eventually, if you're lucky, you get to be oneself. And they say that man loses his misery when he becomes himself. So that was what I was aiming for, really.
Okay. I'm sort of a fan of Douglas Adams, actually. I think Don't Panic is probably our best quotation at this point in time.
Yeah, the Hitchhiker's Guide fellow. Yes, it was. He had his own unique world, you know. But that's what you get for being yourself. you succeed, I think. Everybody has something to offer. It's just finding what is yours. And that's the quest in life, I think. So, yeah, you get there in the end.
How appropriate. I couldn't have segued any better. That was Making Plans for Nigel. XTC, Colin Moudling, our guest, wrote that and played the bass. Let's get back to our conversation with Colin Moudling. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. In a 1984 world, how we're all from education on up. Well, actually, education in America is still very industrial revolution. You're a cog in a wheel, and becoming yourself is fraught with so many difficulties. As a young person, in particular, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I see certain things that she does that you really don't, or you really aren't certain that she's making up her own mind. You know, as much as they try to be individuals, they're grouping themselves together in a really interesting way. So I think from a perspective as a dad, the E.E. Cummings title really works. That was the Dukes of Stratosphere. What in the world? This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Well, I think it's easy to run with the pack, you know. It's too easy. And to go against the grain very often and be yourself is going against a lot of the norm. And that's never easy. It's a fight. Yeah. And I thought was worth talking about.
I understand you came up with the chord changes based on Edgar Elgar's Nimrod.
Well, that's the thing about songwriting. You start off playing other people's tunes.
That's all we do, yeah.
And then you play them very badly and you get all the chords wrong. From that wrongness comes your own tune, you know. Well, I was just saying that's the principle of doing songwriting is that
absolutely.
You have to have a starting point, and the starting point is usually somebody else's song. So, yes, I got noodling with Nimrod from the Enigma Variations by Elgar. And I thought, well, I don't know where he goes here, but I'm going to go there. So I sort of played these other chords on the end of it, and I thought, well, that sounds good. Perhaps I can make something of that, you know. And that's the way it generally works for me, is you start off playing somebody else's tune, you know. But it goes on, and you go off on tangents and stuff, and you get it all wrong. But it's from that wrongness that your own tune comes, you know. Right.
And it's funny because unlike our generation, we're all about the same age. You didn't have Google to look up chord changes, so I did. I started looking up the changes to Nimrod, and I saw. Okay, F, B flat over D, F over A, C7. And then I've got to the next chart and be in a totally different key. So no one really knows the chords, except perhaps Edgar.
I certainly don't anyway.
But what's interesting also on this single, you included the demo of the song. And, you know, back in the day, our day, I guess, demos were taboo. You never got to hear demos. But now it seems, you know, obviously when this in the digital age and CDs, artists release working versions of their songs. What prompted you to put out the demo, which I got to say sounds pretty doggone good?
Well, I didn't have anything else to put on. That's basically. I said to Burning Shed, "You do singles. I think I've got a little single here."
Right.
And they said, "Well, what else have you got?" You know. I said, "Well, not very much." So. I said, I've got the demo of it, which is kind of different and has different words and is kind of different in mood.
Right. Yeah.
And it might be worth putting that on. And then in amongst that, I had this other song called Say It, which was a song I wrote for what was at the time the forthcoming XTC album. That never was. This was going back in the early 2000s when XTC were going to make another album.
That was XTC doing Say It. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
In the end, we disbanded, and I just felt that the song at the time just got put on a promo disc, which I felt was a bit of a waste because I thought it was a really good song and deserved another outing. So I remembered the version that I did of it before the band version was done. And I thought it had a certain feeling about it, which the band version didn't have. So I thought, well, that would be good to put that on in another outing, you know. So that's what comprised the EP. But it's first and foremost a single. the hardest battle, really.
David and I were speaking with bassist Larry Grenadier. I don't know if you're familiar with him, a jazz player, Brad Meldau Trio, Chick Corea. And he just made a record, his last record before COVID was an album called The Gleaners, which is a solo bass album. No other musicians in the studio. And I was thinking, here you are, a bass player, although you're a composer and play other instruments. And we're so used to being in a crowd of people. Describe for me recording a solo single where you don't have bandmates or people around you giving you opinions or contribution.
Well, with difficulty, really, is the answer. When you haven't got other players, you can't just say, it goes like this, fellas, and let's launch into it. You just can't do it. So everything is done piecemeal. Play the keyboard, and that's the basic thing down, and then you put the words on the top, and it's all done piecemeal. And I had a lot of problems with equipment as well. For 5 months I didn't play a note, because there was something wrong with the vocal chain where the volume kept dropping. I now believe it was something to do with the patch bay, but these are technical terms which listeners don't really want to know and don't even want to bother with. But
we really, know them all too well.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of an endeavor. But we got there in the end. I felt the song was really good and I wanted to persevere with it. So, yeah, but it is difficult working on your own. And you have the internet as well now, and you can send files down the line to contribute to other people's records. Okay, It's not like being in the same room as other musicians, but under the circumstances, it's the next best thing.
Interesting that you mentioned the word single, because one of the topics David and I address, and I know a couple of people are mistaken when they heard that Colin is coming out with a single. Well, there must be an album to follow, right? Because that's the world we grew up in. Now, for the younger viewers out there, David, who don't know what an album is, it's one of these things, okay?
Oh, yes.
Do you recognize that?
Square.
What of these things also had is, David, they used to come with what was known as artwork, okay? You had album artwork, and you had lyrics, right? Remember
But that's
those?
predicated that you can read. See,
that's right. You have to know how to read. And then you got cool little stuff like the jacket would try to sell you other XTC albums if you bought this one.
Yeah, well, that's a long-standing thing. That is.
Oh, so that's
inner
Facebook.
Right. And then, of course, there's the medium in which you play the music on. But,
how do you stream that?
You don't. You know what you have to do with one of these, David, is you can't take it out, on your exercise bike or your car. You have to actually sit in a room and listen to it. Does that?
Oh my God. And concentrate.
Oh my God.
Colin, I was thinking you were talking about patch bays and stuff. And a couple of days ago, I was working on my Logic Pro. And again, there are issues with digital technology. Remember the days when you can just plug your damn instrument into a Porta Studio, press play or press record, and there you go. And no worries about patch bays or this, that, and the other thing. And then you've got this thing on a cassette and you bring it into the recording studio and you go, can you get all of that distortion? It's interesting when you talk about your demo, it sounds a certain way and it's recorded a certain way. And then all of a sudden you do it again and it's never the same. And it's just interesting how technology has actually complicated things when it was attempting to make things easier. Porta Studio is the best.
Well, I'm a big analog fella. I don't much mess about with it once it's recorded. I leave that to other people to sort out the mess, So I make sure that the chain that I record is as good as it can be. And once it's recorded, I don't mess around with plugins because most plugins I use are bloody useless, really. Yeah. I just can't get anything decent out of them unless I'm not using the right ones. Well, that's something, I suppose. But I don't much mess with it once it's recorded, and that's it, really. I use a local guy here, Stuart Rowe, and he puts it all together for me, and so that's just wonderful, really. But yes, I'm a big analog fan. I just, like to keep it simple.
You talk about a single, and then, of course, like I said, most people expect an album to follow. But now we live in a digital streaming world. Do you think the album format is still relevant? For example, when I listen to this record over here, I listen to it as one piece of music. I listen to it as, 10 songs that are sequenced and things like that. But someone who goes on Spotify might just hit a playlist and only get one of your songs, one XTC song, one Colin song. So you wonder, does the album still mean anything now in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think it does. But I've always liked singles culture. I grew up with it, and singles in the 60s were integral to the 80s. I always liked singles culture, and now I'm in my 60s. The old rules don't apply anymore. Right. I don't have a record company waving the big stick at me, so I can just do what I want. And I just put a single out for fun, and to my own amusement. And you can do that when you're in that case like me, committing financial suicide, you can do that. It was just a fun thing to do, and remember fun, I don't have to torture myself with an album because albums take far too long.
Yeah.
Well, the way I make them anyway, years. And I really haven't got the time, So if I find a little nugget that's really good, I'll put it out, and to hell with it, That's the way I feel. But yes, there's a place for albums, And years ago, XTC made albums, and we took a lot of time over them, and they took a long time to write, long to record. Now I just haven't got that sort of time. That's all.
That was Life Begins at the Hop by XTC, a Colin Moudling composition. This is Notes from an Artist at CygnusRadio.com.
You mentioned record companies. I know XTC had, some difficulties with Virgin Records, probably because he didn't tour, but that's another topic. Do you think now that musicians, you have the means of distribution, you have a studio in your home, which you couldn't have back in the day, you can now distribute your single to the entire world. Is it the best of times or the worst of times without record labels as we knew them? Because now, Colin Moudling, you don't have to go to a record company and say, hey, put out my record. You can just go to your fan base and do that.
Yeah, it's different times. That's the answer. Yeah. New rules are being set, what you've got to do in order to get records to the public. You don't have to rely on a record company. If you've got a fan base, that is. Of course, it's tough kicking things off. It always is. I was lucky that a lot of the XTC fans came with me and interested in what I did. I had a fan base there, and I was lucky enough to have that. Yeah, it's different. That's what the times are, just different.
It's almost like musicians now, not only do they have to be creative artists, but they have to be entrepreneurs and understand digital media and all that goes with it, and digital marketing.
And they have to be engineers as well, which is always difficult. I'm not an engineer, but I can record myself reasonably well now. It's something I've picked up over the last 10 years, really. Yeah. Before it kind of, let's have a cup of tea and here we go. I never had to worry about the sound. That's another aspect that one has to worry about, really. So, you've got to be a jack of all trades, really.
You're in your hometown. You grew up in Swindon. You were not formally musically educated, but I would imagine as a child growing up, you listened to the BBC, which had a meld of classical, jazz, British folk, pop music from, I would guess, standards to the Beatles. So in a sense, you really did get a musical education, even though you might not have realized.
Yes, Top of the Pops was essential in our musical education, I think.
Yes, it's number one. It's Top of the Pops.
Bands on there, and as I said before, singles culture. Before all the heavy stuff came in with albums and underground music and gatefold sleeves, and growing my hair, there was all of that followed. In the beginning, it was singles, and the only other music that you were aware of was probably hymns at school, in assembly. Right. You'd hear hymns played on the organ or something, and...
That was organist Duke Street doing All the Way My Savior Leads Me. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
It was that, and that went in quite deep, surprisingly, Yeah, that was what it was open to you, but, I had an ear for melody, and singles to succeed, they had to be fairly melodic in those days. And but yeah, that was my education. And then, of course, following that, there was growing my hair and getting into the underground music. And but that's a different. And it was that really prompted me to get going in music and to be a musician and to be respected and trying to be good at playing it. You know?
Well, actually, the pop single format is a great education in and of itself, because you have to apply song form and, like you say, melody and hook, and you've got to bring the listener in within, a verse and a chorus.
Yeah, getting good at it is harder than what people think. It's easy to write a good pop song that's memorable, but it's quite hard to actually get one that really sticks. And that's the quest.
That was Colin Moudling doing Where Did the Ordinary People Go? This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Another thing I've read about you, that, yes, church hymns were a big influence on you and your sense of melodicism. And again, that's another great source of music education.
Yes, I couldn't figure out why some hymns moved me more than others, almost to tears. Stuff like Jerusalem and I Vow to Thee, My Country, it's Holst, so it's New World Symphony of Dvorak, is it? They're kind of moving kind of things. They touched you and you couldn't, you didn't know why. They think, well, that's almost moved me to tears. But that played a big part in my musical upbringing, I think.
Now, you gravitated towards the bass for some reason, I guess. Was it one of those, like all of us, David, right? Well, it only has 4 strings. It must be easier.
Somebody had to do it.
Well, I was very enamored with a bass player called Andy Frazier.
Oh, yes.
A band called Free.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the band because they were a 3-piece band with a singer.
Right.
But they made the 3-piece really work for them, in respect of they left holes in the music,
Yes, they did. That was Andy's style.
Yeah. And I remember the first record that I bought, a long playing record, was
Sons of Sobs?
No, I started on Fire and Water.
Okay.
Which had the hit single All Right Now. And he doesn't play in the verses. He doesn't play at all. And I marveled at that, and I thought, blimey, he's only coming in the choruses, and then he plays this figure in the middle. And I was very taken with it. And I thought, and he had this sound that sounded like an elastic band, It wasn't bassy at all. And I just thought it just caught my ear. I thought, I wonder whether I could do that, And so that was really my starting point. He really got me into it. And so I thought, well, he's not playing very much, so I could do that, So, of course, it's playing in the right places. That's the thing. Yeah, so that's how I got started.
That was Free with the great Andy Frazier on bass. All Right Now. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
It's interesting. One of our upcoming guests, David and I are going to have, is Simon Kirk. And I was talking to Simon about that, and they said when Free was recording that, the band kept looking at Andy saying, well, when are you going to come in? And he was like, no, I'm okay. Just wait. So that sense of rhythm and space is such an important part of being a bass player. It's the notes you don't play.
Well, a lot of people still think there is bass in the verses, I think.
Probably, yeah.
It's the bottom end of the guitar or something.
Yeah.
But it really works. You don't need it. If you've got a fat sound on the guitar, then what's the bass going to do, And he was answered, well, I'm not going to play. And I thought it was masterstroke, and to come in. And that's what makes him coming in the chorus all the more potent,
Right.
And then he expresses this thing in the middle where he's basically playing this little tune, this little figure. Right. And it makes the song for me, it's tremendous.
Interesting, too. I think that's one of the first tunes that used harmonics as part of a bass line.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, could be.
Well, Colin, your bass playing is often compared to Paul McCartney's because you like to use the whole range of the bass. And you have that sense of melodicism. But like Sir Paul it's interesting how your playing not only anchors the tune, but also works as a counter melody. And I was wondering, do you put great effort? We were reading lately about Paul McCartney is after the Beatles all went home, he would keep redoing his bass tracks. Did you really think a lot about doing your tracks when you were recording with XTC?
Well, what was good, it was the fact that the guys let me put my bass on at the end. So
okay, that's interesting, yeah.
Sometimes even the vocals were done and I hadn't even put the bass on, Wow. So I could leave off quite a bit, if you know what I mean, because it was sounding full in certain areas. I thought, well, there's no need for me to play there, So what I played counted for more, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Because I left off bits that I didn't really need to play, which I think I'm almost sure I would have played on had I played the song right from the start with the drummer and the guitar player.
Right, yeah, that's right. It's a whole different way of doing things, yeah.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So, and I know Paul McCartney used to put his bass on, not because, I think it was more the restrictions of 4-track technology,
Right.
And having just to have one track at the end to put the bass on, So, yeah, so I didn't know it, but I was following in Paul's footsteps, but for different reasons.
That was XTC doing Generals and Majors with Colin Moudling on bass. Our guest tonight on Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
We know XTC mostly because you didn't really, you didn't tour that much. You stopped touring quite early in your career. What were some of your tools of the trade? I know you used a Mustang bass like I have back there. What were some of the basses you used that you were comfortable with?
I like to use a shorter scale or medium scale at most, a 32-inch probably, for playing live because they're just easier to throw around, When you get the real long scale basses, I mean, they're hard to and then you're singing as well. So it's just too much. So I tend to graduate to shorter scale basses for playing live. But for studio work, I like my P bass. I got a 65 P bass that I like to use. And I've got my wall bass, which I used throughout the 80s and on most of my XTC career, really. And there were other additions as well, but that's generally the main two, I suppose.
I know Andy used a Gibson, which was technically a shorter scale bass. That was his main instrument for most of his playing in free.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. It had a very funny sound, very honky sound.
Yeah. You're right about that rubber bandy quality to it. I saw you at Privates in New York. I guess that must have been somewhere in the 80s. You guys sounded great. I was surprised that you didn't tour more often.
Well, we toured for the first 5 years of our recording career, I suppose. And then Andy got ill through it. Nervous exhaustion, stage fright, call it what you like, but he didn't feel as though he could carry on. And from my own perspective, I thought, oh dear, just thought that was what bands do to promote the record, How are we going to carry on from here, In short, it really meant you got to see your family grow up. For a start, I had young children at the time. It's more time to write as well. It doesn't seem in most people's eyes, no substitute for playing live. Well, if you're at the front end of it, there is, every cloud's got a silver lining, as I say. We did a fair bit in the early days, but yes, when Andy got ill, we decided that we'd stop and concentrate on making records. And when you don't have the live thing to think about, the studio is a wider palette, and you can put all sorts of things that you don't have to repeat live. And that was, it was eye-opening and a positive.
Yeah, I always thought about that with XTC and almost similar to the Beatles studio years. If the Beatles had to keep touring to make a living, let's say, would they have recorded or written Sgt. Pepper? Would they have recorded or written Abbey Road? Because those records were clearly not meant to be played live. They didn't even think about playing those records live. And I think of XTC's records, as you mentioned, people, my friends who are, you have such a fan base here in the United States. It's really incredible. When we mentioned that we were going to be speaking to you, but XTC probably could not have made the records they did if they had to think, oh gosh, we've got to get on the stage and, we got to replicate all this.
Yeah, that's true. When you haven't got got to make a representation of it live, then world is your lobster,
Right. Although nowadays, obviously, with digital technology, probably could, with a couple of computers, write a couple of keyboards. But you also, XTC, you guys work with some remarkable producers, Steve Lillywhite, Hugh Padgham, Todd Rundgren, John Leckie. I think you did some work with Gus Dudgeon, too, as well, yes?
Yeah, they're all very different guys, but all made a contribution in their own way. Yeah.
How did they influence you? I mean, do you look back on some of the techniques or ideology that they use, and did you incorporate that in your own work?
Well, I think Todd was more hands-on. He wanted to get involved musically and wrote some very nice arrangements for some of the songs as well, string arrangements. Mm-hmm. And then Steve was not so hands-on, but he was a vibe person, He was a good people person, which is important, just as important, really, I think, sure, into getting performances and making people go the extra mile to actually get the performance that's required. And but definitely just as important in their attributes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you look back over your recorded career, what are some of the records that stand out to you? What are the ones you're most proud of?
Oh, good Lord. How long have you got? So some of the Steve Lillywhite, Hugh Padgham recordings were very spirited. Yeah. And we had such a good time recording them, and lots of laughs, Mm-hmm. And later on, I was quite fond of Skylarking. I know that Andy had his problems with it, but I think it's probably our best record still, And, I had no problem with Todd producing, and it's a good producer, I think. Yeah, so that's one of my favorites, certainly.
Again, listening to these records, it's just remarkable how these producers were able to make a record or help you make a record that would stand the test of time, that would still sound fresh 20, 30 years later. When I bet when you were making records in 1985, you never thought, somebody would be listening to this in 2021.
No. I think at the back of my mind, I thought we're doing good work. Somewhere along the line, it'll come out,
Yeah.
It'll reach people's ears and they'll hail it as something, I think you live with that hope that what you're doing will survive you. Yeah, you have that feeling at the back of your mind, but you're not really entirely sure, but you make it because you enjoy it and you've got no expectation of whether it will be, of what it'll do in the future. You just do it because it's what you're doing,
You mentioned Todd Rundgren, and I think it's kind of interesting. As a producer, I guess it must be more difficult being a performer, songwriter, guitarist, keyboardist, et cetera, and so on, to just sit there and produce. And I also think that when you're working with someone like Todd, you almost expect the extra musical stuff to go in, writing the string parts and maybe helping out. Whereas as with a Lillywhite or something like that, who aren't songwriter performers, they're going to give you a different kind of feeling.
Yeah, well, I think we could produce our own records. And I suppose in conjunction with Steve, that's what we did. Whereas Todd played a more active role as producer and really wrestled the reins from us or Andy, and was an old-fashioned producer in many ways, where he assumes control of what will go on the record. But at the time, the record company were getting a bit edgy that we'd made a couple of records and they weren't really successful. So they were thinking, well, the guys have had their shot at producing their records, and the last two haven't done all that well. So let's get somebody who's a producer in the old-fashioned sense and will take control. And that was the rub with Andy, because he didn't really want to relinquish control to a producer as such. Mm-hmm. But the record company gave Todd an amount of money and say, look, just get us a good record, for God's sake. That's what he did. So he succeeded.
Well, Todd was pretty good at that. I mean, look, he rescued quite a few careers. I guess it was Meatloaf. He did Grand Funk Railroad. He really worked outside his genre, Hall & Oates,
Yes, he's got great musicality, and he took the stuff to new heights. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No question. No problem with that. Tremendous talent.
And didn't you approach Brian Eno about doing a record?
Yes, in the early days. I think there was some talk of us working with Brian Eno on Go To, our second record,
Okay.
So, but it never materialized, but it could have, We had a working relationship with John Leckie at the time,
Right.
We felt that we should go with John because it was a good working relationship. So it's difficult when other possibilities come into the fray, but at the time we were on a roll with John, so we thought, we'll do it with John.
And of course, back in those days, we could never envision things such as YouTube and Vimeo and things like that. What about the fact that, all of XTC's videos and your documentaries and TV commercials are all accessible then?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's very disconcerting, really. I'm not proud of all of our videos, But I do think even the single that I just put out, Hardest Battle, making a video for that, I think it just gives the song a little bit more of an extended life,
Right.
I'm not over keen on making video.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the sake of the song, it gives it a bit more life, and that's the way why I do it.
And what was the inspiration behind the video? I know you appear in it.
Yeah. I thought, we'd have this guy dressed up in a George IV garb. He's a dandy, he's the ultimate dandy, George IV, Prince Regent. And it's all about being oneself. And if you want to be a dandy, be a dandy,
Right.
And that's what it's about, is courage to be oneself and not to be worried about people ribbing you over who you are and whatnot, all this. So that's why we got the young chap in the garb and all the rest of it,
Yeah, it's very entertaining. And what does the future hold for Colin? I mean, I think it's great. I think that you get inspiration and you decide to put out a single, and you don't have to ask anybody to do it. You just do it. Are you planning more videos, more singles? Dare I say an album?
You can dare to say it, but whether you'll get it. But the chances are I'll probably do more singles than EPs. I think albums just take too long. Sorry,
right?
Yeah, but that's all to the good. I enjoyed doing this one immensely, and it's lighthearted. And when I get the stuff, I put it out. That's the way I'm operating at the moment. So yeah.
I think really that's going to be the trend for musicians now. Hard copy records or even singles are now obsolete. And if you can compose a song, if you can record a song at 6 a.m. and have it out by noon, why not?
That's all right for some people, not for me, I'll tell you.
Well, if the plugins don't work, right?
Plugins definitely don't work for me, no. Even playing bass is good. I've just played on a session, somebody composing the theme tune to Jellystone. Do you know this Jellystone? I don't know whether it's a film or whether it's a TV show. But do you remember Jellystone with the Flintstones?
Oh, that I remember. Yes, of course. David, that's our
Jellystone Park.
Yogi and Top Cat, Hanna-Barbera.
Hanna-Barbera, correct.
Sure.
Yeah. And the chap wanted me to play bass on the theme tune. So I thought, you know what, that might be good fun to do. And it was. Okay. So that's good to just to how you started, do what you started out doing, and playing bass. So that was a nice distraction, Yeah.
All right. And did you take your 65p bass on the session?
I played the P bass on that one.
All right, there you go. David is a multi-string bass player, and I'm now that him and I have been doing this radio show for nearly a year, I'm getting him to be return to the P bass, and I've actually got a P bass for him here when I see him.
Well, Colin, it's interesting. I've always loved experimenting. But what ended up happening is I got called to do a retread of Humble Pie. So I had to buy a 4-string bass. And
oh, my goodness. It's funny. We interviewed Bruce Thomas, who's a purist, and he referred to that bass you see there, Colin, as a coffee table.
My coffee table.
I've always stuck with the 4 strings. It's just a habit that I can't kick.
But I'm getting into it again. I actually had Pat Wilkins, who makes guitars out on the West Coast. He's building me a fretless 4-string. Yeah. It's still got 4 strings, but at least it's fretless.
We'll get you back to frets and 4 strings then.
I played a fretless a long time ago now, but I got such a ribbing about intonation by the others. I thought, this is just not worth it. I'm just going to get a fretted bugger again and have an easier life,
There's a great story with Rudy Sarzo, who was playing with Ozzy Osbourne. And
Yes.
for what was it, about 4 months, he was playing this fretless. One night they're on stage and Ozzy looks over, you don't have any frets. 4 months later.
That was an interesting tribute record produced by Billy Sherwood. It was called Return to the Dark Side of the Moon. That was Brain Damage. And on that particular track was Colin Moudling, our guest, Robbie Krieger, Jeff Downs, Vinnie Colada, Del Palmer, Michael Sherwood. A really interesting record. There's Adrian Belew on it, Tony Levin, John Wetton. Check that out. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Well, the purpose why he was playing fretless is because the hard rock guys tend to tune down. So what happened is when he tuned his bass down to, let's say, an E flat or a D, he would get the fret noise, from the strings being too floppy. So he opted for a fretless. And but that's the whole point, Colin, is the fretless bass is not supposed to be in tune. You're not supposed to play the thing.
I'm a very big fan of what's known as clicky bass.
Okay.
I think, I don't know if you know Bert Kaempfert.
Of course.
Yes, the old guy from Germany, met the Beatles and so forth. But his music used to be on Radio 2, not Radio 2 that's now in England, but, when it was virtually a jazz station, really. And the basses that he used, which I think was P bass, and you had the low end, but you also had this click on the top.
Right.
So it was kind of real broad spectrum. You had the click on the top and the low at the bottom.
There you have that click bass. That was Bert Kaempfert, and that tune was called That Happy Feeling, 1962. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
And that's pretty much what we was aiming for on this Jellystone project,
Oh, okay.
So it's an old-fashioned sound, but I've always loved that sound, that clicky stuff, which was...
Yeah, the country guys did on that.
Well, that was known in Nashville as what I think it was called tic-tac bass.
Right.
They would call it because you would either, and I actually did a session with tic-tac bass, and they would have the guitar player record your traditional 4-part bass, oompa, root fifth, and then the guitar player would mimic that on the low strings of the guitar with a pick, and you'd have that clack sound and things like. And sure, Nashville, all the country records, sure, that's how they did things. Yeah.
Wasn't it a romp in the Black Forest? Was that the Bert Kaempfert hit over here?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
But
Walk in the Black Forest, I think.
Walk in the Black Forest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that was a Walk in the Black Forest. However, it was not Bert Kaempfert. It was Horst Jankowski. So my only question is, where is Horst Jankowski now? This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com. Horst, if you're out there, give us a call.
We grew up with
we're old.
I still love that bass because you have to use the flat wound strings, really.
Yes.
And which I love anyway. But yes, clicky bass. And you can put the click in reverb, which sounds great,
And then, of course, another thing with tic-tac bass is obviously the guitar player or the bass player would get double scale because you'd have to do 2 tracks. So that's probably why they did it, I think.
Well, I usually play a DI and an amp, so, but I don't play double scale, no.
Well,
no, we all go to bed at the same time. I can't have them on that one, no.
Well, that was the old Herbie Flowers trick, of course, which is legend of why he overdubbed on Walk on the Wild Side, because that's how he made double wage.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I saw that documentary recently about when he played on Transformer,
That was Walk on the Wild Side. Lou Reed, with the great Herbie Flowers, making it happen for double scale. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
There are no studios anymore, David, so we can't do that anyway. Right?
Well, I've got one right here.
Well, I'm saying commercial studio.
Yeah.
There's not many around, I don't think, but Abbey Road is still going. So, yeah,
well,
it's a difficult time for fully fledged studios, I think.
Yeah. But I guess you can say that there is something to be said about going to a commercial studio and getting out of the living room and doing a recording session. It's a whole different feeling, a whole different aesthetic.
Well, the thing with studios closing down is that magpies like me can go and pick over the remains.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Okay.
I've got several things from studios. I've got the echo chamber from Mayfair Studios in London. It's closed some time ago. And I've also got one or two things from the townhouse, which probably were on our records at the time.
By this time, the suitcase was getting very heavy, so I rested on a grassy knoll and took a peek inside. As I
just love that track. It's called Brainiac's Daughter. It's by the Dukes of Stratosphere with, of course, our guest Colin Moudling on bass. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. And thank you, Godfrey.
I got this Summit audio thing from the townhouse, which I've still got, and it's a great little amping thing, compressors and stuff, that really are on offer secondhand, and 1176 I managed to pick up, and limiter. So yeah, you're a bit of a magpie as well. But seems I don't mess with plugins. They're invaluable to me because I've got to get it right when it goes in.
Was that a terrifying experience for you as a young man the first time you walked into a recording studio? I know we all have.
Yeah, because the very first one we walked into was Abbey Road. That's
wow.
What we did. First 3D EP.
Yeah.
And I remember us all coming into the foyer when you come into the entrance, and they were just wall-to-wall Beatles posters and whatnot, or images of the Beatles, and it was quite overwhelming. And I remember that the band would go through this ritual of saying Swindon road names in the hall and say that's the first time that name has been used in this room. So, quite bizarre, what bands get up to and the banter that they use. But we would say Pinehurst Road, which is a name in Swindon, which is a road in Swindon, and say that's the first time that name has been said in these hallowed halls. It worked for us.
That was High Noon by Anton Barbeau, and then It's Raining Again by Supertramp. Now, why did I play those? Well, those were a couple of tracks that our guest, Colin Moudling, played bass on.
Well, Colin, thanks for talking with us.
My pleasure.
We hope to hear more music, and we hope to see more videos from you. And keep in touch. Let us know. We'll let you know when this airs. We'll send you a sound file of it. David, anything else we want to wrap up with?
I was thinking about the title of the song, and it brought to mind... there's a book title that I guess I've pretty well lived my life by, which is What Other People Think of Me Is None of My Business.
Yeah. Well, there's been other songs about that topic, What one remembers the single by Mama Cass, Make Your Own Music, I think which was a Man and Wheel song.
That was Mama Cass doing Make Your Own Kind of Music.
Yeah. Okay. That was a big hit. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great song, and it's a similar kind of sentiment, But there's been others, I'm sure.
Well, we wish you a lot of luck with this track. It's a great tune.
Great tune, and great to see you again.
Thanks very much, Tom.
All right. Okay, Colin. Take care.
See you guys. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that's our show for tonight. I want to thank my co-host Tom Semioli and, of course, Colin Moudling for a fantastic interview. And don't forget, pick up his new single, The Hardest Battle. I also want to let you know that we are archiving all of our shows via our podcast, also titled Notes from an Artist. You can find this on all the major podcast players or at notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. And next week, we've got Mr. Percy Jones. This is David Gross with co-host Tom Semioli. Have a great week.